Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from, or just plain hello if you're joining us on demand. My name is Kelly Barner, and I'm going to be your host for today's conversation. Now, if you haven't been to an Art of Procurement webinar before, there are a few things you're going to notice very quickly that are a little bit different. First of all, there are no slides. These are live conversations that will sort of unfold as they happen, and you have an important role to play in them. If you're here live and you look at the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see that there's a nice wide chat panel. I'll be keeping an eye on that as we go through today's conversation. And I will pull in your comments and your questions as we go through the discussion. We're not necessarily going to make everybody hold on to those questions and comments until we get to the last few minutes. Now, in terms of today's topic, we're going to be focusing on how procurement helps companies go beyond the deal to drive value in times of mergers and acquisitions. Now, procurement often has unique ways of looking at everything, but mergers and acquisitions in particular create an opportunity for us to create outsized value, let's just say. Now, we can both create additional efficiencies and value and also identify and ward off risk. So it is a massive opportunity for procurement to get some visibility and drive meaningful business impact. I would like to start the conversation by bringing up on stage with me Sydney Ray. Sydney is a sourcing manager at Whitecap, and she is the one that's going to be sharing her expertise as we go through the next half an hour or so. So, hi, Sydney. Thank you so much for being with me.
Hey, Kelly. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Now, one of the traditional questions we always ask everybody, because we know these journeys are unique and sometimes unexpected, did you find procurement or did procurement find you?
So procurement found me. So I started out, I got a bachelor's in business administration with a minor in project management. And then I had the joy of starting out at a paper company that focused on global procurement. So started out as an analyst, working my way up there, understanding, global procurement, specifically within the MRO space, how that works, how, that operates, the different categories, whether it's, a $200,000 category or a $50 million category, understanding the nuances of how, that kind of transitions and transpires as, you look at a 5-10 year plan for the company. So I had the joy of doing that. And then that slowly led from one thing to another. And here I am at Whitecap as the category manager.
Now, for people who haven't heard of Whitecap, what does the business do?
We are one of the leading distributors in North America when it comes to construction supplies and materials. So when you think, safety tools, products, when you think anything from engineered services to value add services, that's where our footprint lies and where we're trying to not only have our current footprint, but take it to the future and kind of reinvent what Whitecap looks like, since we have done some splits from previous companies back in 2020. So we are excited to do that. So we're in North America and Canada with over 450 about 460 locations between the two. With a heavy focus in North America. And what we're doing is just going into, anything when it comes to construction materials, when it comes to corporate construction sites and looking at that commercial and taking that market and, helping them with services when it comes to anything and everything they need delivered to the job site.
Now, did you have much experience with mergers and acquisitions before you came to your current role? Or is that something that you've sort of picked up along the way being in this particular sourcing manager role?
Yeah, so it's fun. I did not have direct interaction with the mergers and acquisitions, although I did play a role in a little bit of that on the back end. But making my way into Whitecap, that's where the full transition happened, where I took on a lead role when it comes to indirect procurement and what that looks like for the acquisition phase. I will say it's been a transitional journey, even within Whitecap, and what that looks like as we've grown. Because 3 years ago, we weren't doing, 20 plus acquisitions a year. We were doing maybe 2. And those were more of small acquisitions. But now that phase has transitioned. And so that means that we need to look at the overall acquisition, integration
Yeah.
function as a whole and put liaisons there. So I've kind of stepped up and I play that role or that hand for indirect sourcing.
Now, if we can put some numbers around this, just to give people a sense of how many acquisitions you've experienced, how many acquisitions did you participate in, say, in 2024?
In 2024, we did, I think it was either 19 or 20. So it was quite a bit.
That's
And I
almost
say
two a
that,
month.
yeah, and how it leads usually at the start of the year, January, February, it's a little bit slow. So then
Mm,
that kind of
right.
pushes the number up. June, July, it gets heavy, and so you have your hands in a lot all the
Yeah.
time, which is awesome. You never know, what the day's going to hold or what you're going to come up against, but it's very interesting when we're talking about bringing in these new co's and having these acquisitions because they're all different. Some of them
Yeah.
are a mom and pop, one store location. And then some of them are like when we did recently Dayton Superior, where, they have a massive footprint and they're a manufacturer. And so each of those are handled a little bit different. And the amount of attention that you have to put on them and how you bring
Mm.
them in and you tweak and adjust the current processes, varies on the type of acquisition that you're doing.
Now, to the extent that you can speak about it publicly, do you have a sense of what the acquisition plan is going to be like for this year? So, the fact that we're talking in early April, you're basically just starting to come out of what was that slow period last year. Do you have any sense of what the next 8 months might be like?
Yeah, considering we've already done 2 acquisitions this year, I can say that our goal is to do more acquisitions and to do a transition, which means, turn them over to our ERP system at a faster rate than what we were doing
Okay.
prior. So, making sure that we've streamlined everything when it comes to the intake of these new co's and making sure that we have all the processes laid out,
Mm,
so that it is easy to read, easy to digest, and then easy for them to articulate all the information we need back out
okay.
has to be on point because when we're doing these, to your point, 2 a month, which we're going to ramp that up even more,
Yeah.
um, we need to make sure that we have a streamlined process to gather this information.
And I knew you talked about the fact that the acquisitions are different based on the size of the company, right? And what their focus is before they join Whitecap. But if we can sort of generalize, how is it that the procurement team ends up fitting into the acquisition process?
Yeah, so it's a little bit different with each one, but overall the same footprint and the same mapping. So what we do is we like to go in early and get as much information as we can. So if we can go in pre-acquisition and we can gather some of the preliminary data,
Okay.
if we can get our hands on that, understanding who they're using, frequency, how things are being paid, that's going to help us understand the contracts a little bit better, and then help us when the acquisition happens be ready to move faster and either flip over to our national contracts or understand the length of time they need to stay on their previous provider, or if they're just going to never transition to one of
Yeah.
our national accounts. And again, it's all different because depending on if it's a mom and pop and they can get really good pricing at a local level, that happens sometimes. And
Yeah.
since, P&L at the end of the day, we don't want to increase, what someone is taking on. We need to be able to keep track of everything when it comes to what they're paying out and have that so finance down the road can look back at these files and look back at this information and understand what they need to do with it, what they need to pay out. So getting in early, getting in
Yeah.
before acquisition if possible is beneficial. But then also as soon as you acquire the company, making sure that you are making that contact and you are laying out what you need, um, is the second best option.
It's interesting that you bring up getting involved pre-acquisition. It's one of the things I was going to ask you about because I can certainly think through the benefits of having as much notice as humanly possible. But the fact that that does happen in quite a few cases makes me think that procurement has proven the benefits of getting them involved sooner, right? I mean, if it was a push and the business didn't see value for it, you would probably never have that door open to you. But I have to think that whether it's finance or whether it's simply at a leadership and operational level, they see the advantage of bringing in procurement early whenever possible.
Yes, and to your point, so some of the things that the hurdles that we have gone through in the past when it comes to not getting in early enough would be, temp labor. We have a lot of light industrial temporary labor, whether it's a
Okay.
warehouse worker or a forklift driver, and the liability and the risk that's associated with those associates, making sure that they are with a national provider or someone that we have a contract with that's a compliant vendor, a compliant temp agency, so that if something does happen, which we hope it doesn't, because we have
Yeah.
EHS trainings in place, and we have safety measures. But it does happen where someone gets hurt, and you have to fall back on the contract to make sure that the company is covered. From an insurance and liability standpoint. So making sure that when you're acquiring these companies, understanding the risks that you're taking on.
Yeah.
Temporary labor is a great one, but there's so many more. EHS, we have a full EHS team. So making sure that even the associates, as we're acquiring them, are getting this EHS training, and then doing all the checks and to make sure that they have watched and signed off that they know the white cap standard
Mm.
is beyond measurable.
And just to double check that I'm thinking about it right. So EHS, is it employee health and safety?
Environmental health and safety.
Environmental health and safety. I was
But it
close.
does no, you are right there, but it does go into, making sure that the associates know how to handle everything, and then it,
Yeah.
trickles down to the warehouse and how that operates.
Mm. And, when we talk about the risk that you're taking on, that's another one of those interesting angles because certainly most people go into an acquisition thinking, sure, we know it's not going to be easy, but this is ultimately going to be a win for everyone. You do also need to remember that there are those potential risks and maybe even surprises that could come out during the process. When you think about some of the acquisitions that you've done, whether yet last year or before, have there been any surprises, things that you hadn't expected to uncover that either came out as you were going through the process of integrating things or even down the road as you, excuse me, got to a sourcing project where having this new acquisition as part of the deal started to change the requirement landscape? Are there any surprises that are interesting to talk about?
From a procurement standpoint, when it comes to indirect goods and services, what's going into the business, there is a surprise with every acquisition. And they vary. So some of
Yeah.
them are around utilities and understanding when we get our hands on what these branches, these associates are paying for the utilities, in the markets that can be sourced, because there are only certain states that you can source utilities.
Okay.
Understanding what they're paying and seeing, the contracts that were signed at that local level and getting them out of that you would be surprised at the level of payments people are making without even understanding, this is 6 times as high as what I should be paying, because they just don't know.
Okay.
Or some of the smaller surprises are around like printers. Over the time, those add up. Like, the associates just don't understand, and they don't understand what they're paying, in the sense of, because they're a lean team. They
Sure.
are a mom and pop shop that has grown and expanded, and this is what they know. If they were paying it 10 years ago, they just continue to pay it because they are so lean, they are wearing so many hats, that they don't think to check and adjust or to
Yeah.
source something else, or to double check the market. So just going in there and being that second line of defense for them, so that they understand, what they were paying, why we're looking into it, and how they can benefit in the future. That's kind of where, we've taken a stand on it, because you're talking to people. They just were just newly acquired. They're nervous. They don't know what the future holds. They are now part of, a whole new corporation that is a lot larger than
Yeah.
what they were used to in the past. So going in and really talking them through that is what we found to be very helpful with these acquisitions.
Now, to what extent is that sort of an extension of the idea that, I mean, even let's say an internal stakeholder or a distributed buyer somewhere that's already inside of Whitecap, Sometimes you can find that those people are a little bit apprehensive when procurement starts coming around. Oh, you're going to make this slow. Oh, you're going to tell me I can't buy from who I want to buy from. If you extend that then to somebody who has newly been brought into the organization that maybe didn't get to vote or have a role in making that decision, is it a similar process of winning those stakeholders over? Does it take a little bit longer? Do you find there are additional questions that they have? Or is it really just, nope, going through that same communication, letting them know how procurement works, giving them an opportunity to adjust to it? How similar are those two scenarios?
Yes. So I would like to say that I think it's easier for internal stakeholders to get on the bandwagon. So when you said, other stakeholders in different functional groups might say, "Oh,
Yeah.
well, this process is slower." I think you have policy to fall back on.
Mm,
But with these new co's, when you're bringing them in, the people aspect of it. Again, you have to remember that you have to. I don't want to say handhold it because we've made it to where a process to where you don't necessarily have to, but giving them one point of contact, sitting down, having a
okay.
meeting with them on the calendar, if you can't go face to face with them to understand, and lay out the ground rules, why we're doing certain things, that helps a lot. And what I've found is when you do that, they it clears up the ambiguity that they have and it makes them feel a little bit more comfortable when they're coming in. And so also giving them that single point of contact, you build that relationship so they feel
Yeah.
like they can, advocate for themselves or give more input. Whereas, again, you are, in your local branch, local facility that you've worked in for 30 years, and this large corporation is coming and, it looks like they're swallowing you. You might not be as advantageous to speak up for yourself
Mm,
or to advocate for the programs. But what I tell these newcos is, you know your business better than anyone else. You know your market, you know your region, you know the local vendors. We need to know where your pain points are. So I want to hear from you. I want you to advocate for yourself, and that way I can tailor the conversation. I can tailor the national programs if we need
yeah.
to for what makes sense. Because end of day, I like to look at procurement as, internal stakeholders are my customer. So I'm
Yes.
creating these national programs for my colleagues. So you are, my colleague that I work with on a daily basis. I need to know your pain point so that I can then take that and take that back to our national partners, take that back to our reps, and we can have that conversation so that you aren't feeling that tension anymore. So hand holding them has been really beneficial, but also laying out everything. We found that as we do these acquisitions, Smartsheet has been phenomenal to cut down on the emails, because what we found is, we're needing to capture invoices, we're needing to capture contracts,
Yeah.
and we have a list of these national categories that we're working on. But what we found over time is that, we need to expand that. We might not have a national partnership, but we need to know about your printers. We need to know about if you have anything with, Quadient Pitney Bowes for AP processing, because you're at a local facility and you don't have, a national AP, a full AP team
Yeah.
onshore and offshore to help you process things. So, some of those things, it's been a check and adjust as we've grown and evolved. And then, just as we said earlier, going back into acquisitions, and looking back and getting in early when we're doing these is
Yeah.
something that hindsight we wish we did with some of our previous acquisitions years ago, because not capturing some of this information has caused hurdles downstream. So with
Okay.
finance, understanding all of that. So it's definitely a process, and each acquisition is different, and you have to handhold it in a way. But
Sure.
um, but normally I find that they are excited, and they're ready for the growth and the change. And if you do it the right way, they're willing to hop on board.
Yeah. Now that's sort of the internal new stakeholder or new internal customer point of view. But I'm sure in some cases, especially for those mom and pop businesses that you've talked about that might have long-standing local partnerships with suppliers, what is the transition or communication process like for those suppliers?
Yes. So, again, we handhold it. We have a team here at Whitecap that we're working hand in hand with the local facility, to make sure that we're encompassing any of the other the outside partnerships that they have. And what we have to do sometimes is we have to bring them all into a conversation, explain what's going on. And sometimes these local partners, they can be rolled up into our national programs.
Okay.
So we can encompass that. We can have discussions. We can meet in the middle. We can come to a consensus on pricing or KPIs, new KPIs that might need to be met. Again, it's all different. The categories, even the same category, could be handled a little bit differently depending on the acquisition, whether it's a
Yeah.
stock or an asset deal, whether it's a company that we acquire, but they're still acting as their own business or entity. So you have to take all of these different factors into consideration with how you're going to handle the different partners that the local branches are already, ingrained with and they've been working with for 30 years. So again, that even requires hand holding at times. So, it's not always black and white on how you're going to, bring these new companies into the portfolio.
Now, one of the questions that I can see just came in on the chat, I think is an interesting way to look at this. You've done so many of these acquisitions. Let's just assume the 20 or so in 2024. You've almost become as much of an expert in acquisition, right? As opposed to just procurement category knowledge. Do you have sort of phases of the integration effort? Is it like, so there's pre-acquisition discovery and then maybe immediate post-acquisition. How do you break those steps and stages of work down?
Yes. So as a company, Whitecap has designated like phase one and who goes in first. So, taking procurement out of it, HR needs to go in first. They need to, get
Yeah.
everyone rolled into our healthcare plans. They need our benefits, our 401ks. They need to make sure that the people aspect is taken care of. So then it rolls into the other areas and delegated down. And now with this, what we found is procurement has historically gone last. So they have been the last to go because they are just the
Yeah.
everyday function. Worst case scenario, this facility that we're acquiring or these, 6 or 7 locations, they're on their own little national program or the local vendors are supplying. Business is still flowing. Everything is still going. End of day, the business still has to make sure that they are attending to the customers that are coming in
Mm.
while also phasing in the new co as a new co to Whitecap. And so juggling all of the different functional groups from Whitecap that are coming in while also doing their day-to-day job has been hard. And that's something that Whitecap wants to keep in consideration and we're trying to do. And it's been a check and adjust as we've gone. Some we've done better than others, and we've listened to the feedback of these new co's on how we're doing it. And we're trying to tweak it. But with that, I will say one of the biggest learning points in
Yeah.
the procurement space when it comes to M&A is procurement cannot be looked at as last because down the line for finance, it causes bottlenecks down the line, not knowing,
Okay.
what vendors to pay or when is this contract going to expire. And so we're still finding that we're paying, for duplicate services and products when if procurement would have gone earlier in the stage of the
Yeah.
acquisition, it would have been a little smoother. So with that, we have taken the approach of the phase one info request is what we ask, and we've laid it all out there for them so that they know the immediate ask of what we need, why we need it, and where they need to provide feedback. And that's where we've gone back in and used Smartsheet, and we use biweekly calls to talk through different things. And it allows a platform for the new co to ask questions. So that's been a learning experience for Whitecap as a whole based off
Yeah.
prior feedback. Because initially we did think, we can't inundate this new company with all the different functional groups all at once.
Yeah.
And we want to give them time to get the immediate asks in before, other groups stop bombarding them. So that's been an adjustment, but it's something that we have tweaked based off, what we've seen with finance down the road.
Yeah. And it sounds like from some of the comments that I'm seeing, other people have experienced the same thing. I'm sure part of it is those opportunities for efficiency, but part of it just has to be change fatigue. I mean, whoever goes last, you're going to find a group of people who are exhausted, who may feel a little bit overwhelmed. There's been a lot of change. You don't necessarily want to hold procurement off to the last, even if operationally the group can completely keep functioning. But at that point, the appetite for change, the openness to the idea, you want to sort of catch people a little bit sooner and position it as more of an opportunity, right, to save and be more efficient and to benefit from larger contracts than just sort of one more thing you're tacking onto the end of the process.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's something that has been an adjustment. And I think it goes
Mm,
back to working with people and, getting that face to face time with them and letting them voice, their concerns or what they're seeing or what they like. Like we want positive feedback as well so that we can
yeah.
take that. So just, making sure that you remember, end of day, this is work and you are integrating another company. But there is a people aspect to it. And I think that's sometimes forgotten in procurement,
Mm.
and that is there's a benefit to it and keeping that on the forefront.
Yeah. Now, speaking of benefits, Jyoti just posted a really interesting question in the chat. So when we think about M&A, a lot of times it comes down to cost and efficiency, right? But there may also be contract terms or clauses that end up being really important because ultimately over time you're trying to get any of your acquisitions aligned with Whitecap's existing policies and priorities. Are there any specific contract terms that tend to be things that you check for right out of the gate because either they're a concern and you want to address them right away, or you just simply want to know that they're there?
Yes, there are quite a few. So, as we go into these contracts and we're reading them, again, you got to go back to understanding what type of deal was this? Was this a stock
Yes.
deal? Was this an asset deal? Is this company operating as their own entity? And then keep that in mind as you're reading these. And then also understanding the marketing aspect. Are they
Yeah.
going to be joining Whitecap, or is there going to be co-branding? And I'll say that because that goes into like our uniform agreements, and understanding is there a buyout for those. So that's a really big one, that we look for first because again, cost out. Making sure that we're driving savings
Yep.
is end of day what procurement is looking to do. So looking for that cost out, but understanding is there a huge termination fee?
Yeah.
Are there clauses where you have to pay, for the duration of the contract if you want to get out, 16 months early? And then, one of the biggest pieces here is when we're acquiring these companies, a lot of them don't have the contracts on hand. So making sure that we're then taking the step
Mm.
based off an invoice or some little piece of information that we can somehow get in touch with a local rep, so to then learn, what are the terms of this contract? Because the new co might not even know, what they signed on to because it was 10 years ago. And what we find that happens more often than you would think is, we'll get our hands on a contract and they want to roll into the national agreement, but it was just auto renewed for the eighth time for another
Okay.
3-year contract and you can't get out of it. And
Yeah.
that's a little frustrating for both Whitecap and the new co as they're coming in. But that's one of the things you find and one of the things you need to look into. Also, when it comes to like insurance, making sure, from a liability standpoint, I mentioned this earlier, but temporary labor is a huge one because there's a huge risk there.
Yeah.
Making sure that whatever contracts they have, if we need to ride out the duration of that contract for maybe 6 to 8 months, sometimes it's up to 2 years, we need to ride it out. That they're covered for what they need, and it's up to the Whitecap standards. And sometimes we have to get legal involved to double check these
Yeah.
things and make sure that we're not setting this newly acquired company up for failure or putting them at major risk.
Yeah.
And then we have a lot of drivers because we're delivering goods and materials to
True.
job sites. So the drivers aspect of it, making sure that they are covered from a liability standpoint, in any of the local contracts is beneficial. But usually those we can roll over, so we don't have as much of a problem with that. But the risk, it's there.
It's still there. Now, Cindy, as we start to sort of wind this down, I have two really similar questions that I want to ask you to get a perspective on this. So, the first one is if we have somebody with us that knows they're part of a procurement team that is going to be acquiring another company, what would be sort of your top piece of advice for them?
Make sure that you are laying out the ask as plainly as possible. So, over communicating, making it to where there is no ambiguity, there's no hidden agenda onto what they might need to present and why. So, getting all of that information in front of them early on
Yeah.
and laying it out black and white so that they can ask all the questions on the front end and reassure them as to why you're doing what you're doing. And I find that that helps the communication and that helps drive them wanting to get you more information sooner rather than holding off because they're nervous or scared. So that is probably the biggest piece of advice: over
Yeah.
communicating and laying it all out as plainly as you can in front of them.
Now let's flip this around. Let's say we have somebody with us who is part of a procurement team that is about to be acquired. So on the other side of the table in this scenario, based on your perspective and having seen the individuals that make it easier for you to acquire their team, bring in their activity, when you think about the difference between the people that can sort of facilitate that process, make it more pleasant, versus the people that might make it a little bit more challenging, whether that's intentional or not, what advice would you offer to someone who is being acquired?
That's a good one. And I would say the biggest piece of advice is to advocate for yourself. Make sure that you are, telling, the procurement team that's coming in, and asking all the questions, telling them all the details, because we as a procurement team need to know what's
Yeah.
going on at the local level because you know your local base better than anyone else. I'm, sitting in a corporate office somewhere, hundreds of miles away, and I need to know this information. And the only way I'm going to get it is if you advocate for yourself and
Yeah.
lay that out there on the front end.
Yeah. So, as much as these mergers and acquisitions are organization to organization, at the end of the day, it ultimately boils down, it sounds like, to a lot of human to human connections and communication. I love your use of the term advocacy there, right? Like, be vocal, say what you need, share the information. Sydney, first of all, I want to say to you, good luck in 2025. I'm sure, as you
Thank
said,
you.
you'll never have a dull moment. You will never necessarily know what to expect. But at the same time, thank you for being willing to share what you've learned in going through this process above and beyond the procurement work that's sort of the core of your role. There are so many companies now that are on one end or the other of these deals. And so it's really interesting to get your perspective, having gone through this process so many times and sort of figuring out those repeatable phrases that you talked about. So, Sydney, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Kelly. And I appreciate you opening up this platform for people like myself in procurement or other functional groups that might have a
Yeah.
dotted line to procurement to ask questions, to have this forum and this platform to speak openly. So I appreciate you. Thank you.
Absolutely. And of course, we also appreciate everybody who has joined us live, everybody who is watching later at their convenience. Definitely reach out to us. Definitely share this recording if you think somebody else is on one side or the other of an acquisition and would benefit from it. We're glad you are willing to spend some of your time with us. And I wish everybody a great rest of your day.